The Philippine foreign minister curses out China. The EU suspends its big China investment deal. And why Chinese clergy love the motherland. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China News Headlines. The Philippines is getting pretty fed up with the Chinese Communist Party, constantly encroaching on its territorial waters. And some Filipino officials are expressing it in some pretty colorful ways. Chinese ships have been mooring in disputed territorial waters. And here's a tweet from the Philippine Foreign Minister Teodoro Teddy Boy Locsin responding to that. China, my friend. How politely can I put it? Let me see. Oh, get the f*** out! What are you doing to our friendship? You, not us. We are trying. You. You're like an ugly oaf, forcing your attentions on a handsome guy who wants to be a friend, not to father a Chinese province. I think Teddy Boy here might be my favorite politician now. Imagine if all officials talked to the Chinese Communist Party like that. Hey, you ugly oaf, we're gonna circle back and kick your butts out of the South China Sea. China responded to Locsin's tweet by calling for basic manners. Yes, the country that uses gang rape as a form of torture is lecturing the Philippines about manners. Anyway, Locsin has since apologized to China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, while also bragging about being the original wolf warrior diplomat. He sounds like an interesting guy. Meanwhile, President Duterte's spokesperson reminded Philippine officials that profanity has no place in diplomacy. Duterte added, "I'm the only one who can curse." And for clarity, that's not a joke. That's what Duterte actually said. Talk about rules for thee, but not for me. But in a move that could be even more explosive than a Twitter fight, the Philippines has also rejected a fishing ban put in place by the Chinese Coast Guard, saying that Filipino fishing boats should keep on fishing in their territorial waters. The Philippine Coast Guard is also continuing to challenge Chinese maritime militia vessels in the South China Sea. I'm just waiting for Chinese officials to tell the Philippine Coast Guard to mind their basic manners. And speaking of manners, China's Political and Legal Affairs Commission, one of the top party organizations, posted this to their Weibo account. That's China's version of Twitter. The text says, China lighting a fire versus India lighting a fire. It compares China's space launch to India burning bodies of people that died from COVID-19. Now, obviously, this lack of sensitivity upset like a billion people. And then Chinese authorities deleted the post amid a huge backlash. Even the editor-in-chief of my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, said China's official social media accounts should hold high the banner of humanitarianism at this time, show sympathy for India, and firmly place Chinese society on a moral high ground. When even the Global Times says a meme was too nationalistic, you know it went too far. But I don't think the Global Times or the Chinese Communist Party are upset about being insensitive. They're upset because they overplayed their hand at a time when they're trying to woo India by being really helpful during their current coronavirus crisis. It's more than just vaccine diplomacy. It's oxygen concentrator diplomacy. All this is happening at a time when India is trying to ally with the West to counter China. You know, because China keeps trying to take Indian border territory and spy on India through mobile apps. And because China covered up the deadly coronavirus, which is why it spread to India, which is why India has to cremate so many bodies. And more fun China news coming up after the break. Welcome back. You may have heard of Cuban refugees risking their lives to flee to America. But now, a Chinese man seeking freedom and equality says he traveled to Taiwan in a dinghy. It took him 10 hours to make the 100+ mile journey across the Taiwan Strait in a small rubber boat powered by an outboard motor. Taiwan police arrested him at the port of Taichung. When they asked if his life was bad in mainland China, Zhou said he believed life in China is all kinds of bad. Well, he's not wrong. It looks like the EU has effectively suspended its proposed mega investment deal with China. The deal is not officially dead, but an official from the European Commission said that they've basically stopped pushing for it. It's going to be hard to get the European Parliament to vote in favor of an investment deal with China when China is sanctioning members of the European Parliament. That investment deal was signed at the end of December, spearheaded by Germany. Got to get those German cars in the China market. But then, in March, the EU sanctioned Chinese officials for the genocide of ethnic Uyghurs in Xinjiang. China responded by sanctioning EU officials, and now things are just kind of a mess. Who could have predicted that? The EU has also laid out new rules on foreign investment that will make things tougher for China. If approved, the rules would give EU antitrust authorities a lot of power to block investments from Chinese companies. The Chinese regime has used business investments as a way to infiltrate and undermine the EU. The new regulation would help address rising European concerns that Chinese businesses, bolstered by state support, are competing unfairly around the world, making rock-bottom bids at public tenders and offering unbeatable premiums for acquisitions. Of course, the rules aren't targeting China. No, they're just about foreign investment, from no country in particular. Now, I don't often do this on the show, but I want to talk to you about Jesus. Jesus told us to love thy neighbor. And as an extension of that, new rules for religious clergy in China dictate that clergy should love the motherland. Clergy should also support the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and practice the core socialist values. It's in the Bible, somewhere. I think it's in Corinthians, with Chinese characteristics for a new era. Now, for some reason, these new regulations have some asking if Christians are next in line for re-education. Authorities in China are detaining Christians in secretive mobile transformation facilities to make them renounce their faith. There's also reports of a crackdown on Christians using social media. But the Chinese Communist Party may reap what it sows. Retribution may be coming. Chinese state-run media are warning about the risks of rising sea levels. If that happens, they're going to need someone to part the waters, and he'll demand that China let their people go. And that, my friends, is the kind of humor 7 years of Catholic school education will get you. Here's another joke for you. In the 2 years since China arbitrarily kidnapped 2 Canadians, the Canadian government has okayed nearly $6 million in contracts with China. That's on top of over $2 million in direct aid. And yet, despite the Canadian government piling on this kind of immense pressure, China still hasn't released the 2 Michaels. That's the joke. Meanwhile, in the US, Chinese companies are having record-breaking IPOs. Yet another way in which Americans are investing in China, even if they don't want to. And US defense contractor Honeywell has been fined $13 million for sharing military secrets with China. But don't worry, because the G7 just met and they have a message for China. The West ain't over just yet. Yes, the West is truly putting up a strong, united front against the Chinese Communist Party. By the way, New Zealand has decided not to call China's treatment of Uyghurs a genocide. And coming up after the break, who's a bigger threat, China or America? The answer may surprise you. Welcome back. In a new global poll from the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, looking at 50,000 people in 53 countries, the US is seen as a bigger threat to democracy than Russia or China. That's right, the US has a lot of problems. And why should we criticize China when we have our own issues? What about how the US treats its ethnic minorities? Isn't it really the US that's undermining democracy around the world? Why do so many people think the US is a bigger threat to democracy than China, a country where dissidents are put in labor camps and people are tortured for their beliefs? I don't know, but for a long time, the Communist Party has been pushing this logic, that no one is allowed to criticize unless that person is himself perfect. And no one is perfect, except maybe Jesus, but he'd be in a Chinese labor camp, so no one could hear him. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a member of the China Uncensored 50-Cent Army, fans who support us and our efforts to expose the truth about the Chinese Communist Party on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Banana Pancakes asks, when do we cancel China instead? That's in response to our episode about the Oscar-winning Chinese director Chloe Zhao getting censored in China. Banana Pancakes, that's actually a really good question. When do we cancel China? I would say cancel the Chinese Communist Party for clarity, but that's exactly what needs to happen. The Chinese regime is propped up by the West. People around the world need to be very clear on what the Chinese Communist Party is. A country that's using gang rape as a form of torture. That's not a regime you should do business with. It's not a regime you should cooperate with on climate change. It's a pariah that you ought to shun at every opportunity. It's North Korea with better PR and a lot more money that they made from the West. Try not to buy things made in China. It's hard, but try to make sure you aren't invested in the Chinese market. Don't support companies that turn a blind eye to human rights abuses in China. Tell your elected representatives to do the same. When do we cancel the Chinese Communist Party? Today. So how do you get the word out? Well, this is something I've been thinking about. Sharing these episodes is a great start, but I was considering making, for example, PowerPoint presentations about the Chinese Communist Party, their human rights atrocities, and the threat to global freedom and democracy. I was thinking I could make these available to you, and you could use them to help educate your schools, businesses, Rotary clubs, what have you. But is that something you would be interested in? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for your question, Banana Pancake, and your support. And a big thank you to everyone who supports China Uncensored on Patreon. We could not do this show without you. So thank you for joining us in the fight to expose the Chinese Communist Party to the world. If you're interested in joining, head over to patreon.com/ChinaUncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.